Hi there, I'm Curtis Kirshner. This is Crash Course. I'm in a rolly chair, and today we're going to be discussing key concepts. That's right, key concepts, truly the bane of all WAP students everywhere. They make us stay up late, they make us work hard, and they make us plagiarize worse than Amy Schumer's comedy career. But don't worry, because all that hard work pays off, because we learn stuff. No, we don't. Well, we're here to teach you about key concept 3.3, Roman numeral 3, part C. Because what's better than doing key concepts and making an 8-minute video answering 2 questions that you could have answered in 3 sentences? So, what new forms of coerced labor developed in this era? Where in the world did free peasants begin to revolt against their existing governments? And will you care? All this and more answered after the intro. That was 30 seconds, right?
No, that was 50.
Oh, fuck!
New forms of coerced labor appeared, including serfdom in Europe and Japan. So what is coerced labor? Simply put, coerced labor is a system in which workers are forced to work as a form of servants as a result of threat, intimidations, or other causes including force or need. Serfdom is a form of coerced labor that is expansively present in the widespread feudalistic regions of the post-classical era. The workers, or otherwise peasants, called serfs, came under control of landlords in exchange for protection and shelter. While this doesn't sound like that bad of a system, the serfs had little to no rights, weren't able to sell their lands after becoming under the jurisdiction of the landlords, and weren't allowed to leave without permission. Serfdom isn't the only form of coerced labor. There's also slavery and other forms of wage working that will be addressed later. Serfdom was more heavily present in Europe than in Japan, partly due to the fact that Japan was a militant country. The pyramid simply displays serfdom and the whole system it is involved in, which is feudalism primarily. The highest class displays royalty, including kings. Next below are the lords, then the knights and a select few common folk, and finally the peasants, or serfs. The pyramid displays the cycle of services that makes up the system of serfdom, which is the status of peasants under feudalism. As shown, in exchange for shelter, food, and protection, the peasants provide their superiors with labor to work farms and sometimes rent payments. Higher up the scale, knights and some commoners provide military service, public respects, and acts of honoring to lords who in exchange return goods, food, and a different form of protection. Finally, the lords supply the king with loyalty and military support in exchange for power, fiefs, which are portions of lands, and a labor force.
Coerced labor was a very common practice in the Incan Empire during the post-classical period. The mata was a system used throughout the Incan Empire that stated public service was mandatory. That public service often included building extensive road networks and sanitation. Most people of the Incan Empire spent 300 days a year performing mata, and the other 65 days were allocated for farming. The purpose of the mata was to establish a system that allowed every citizen to help grow and contribute to the wealth of the empire. Mata is one of the reasons that the Incan Empire was able to maintain dominant vast expanses of the Andes Mountains for such a long period of time.
These pictures are examples of some of the tasks performed during the mata. As seen in some of these pictures, many people assisted in the construction of extensive road networks. Public service allowed for the Inca Empire to last for centuries until the Spanish and Portuguese arrived. For example, the Mongols failed to establish systems of public service, and that ended with them losing vast expanses of land. The use of mandatory public service was greatly beneficial to the longevity of the empire. Contrary to other forms of coerced labor, the Inca people were honored to serve their empire, therefore there was not any abuse of the citizens. It was a way of giving back and paying tribute to your empire. You may ask how public service results in loss of land. Well, when there was nobody to help the empires maintain their land militarily or structurally, it results in a loss of land.
In the late Middle Ages, peasants resisted attempts to raise dues and taxes by staging revolts. Most of the revolts expressed the desire of those below to share in the wealth, status, and well-being of those more fortunate. In the end, they were almost always defeated by the nobles. Because of the results that occurred in the Byzantine Empire and China, the peasant was a disparaging concept. It was something separate and seen now as something negative from those who had wealth and status. This was an entirely new social idea from earlier times when society had been based on 3 orders: those who work, those who pray, and those who fight, when being a peasant meant being next to God, just like the other orders. The main reasons that these revolts occurred was because there was an increasing gap between the wealthy and the poor. The income of the poor was declining. There was a rise in inflation and taxation, and the crisis of famine and plague. The first reason being the gap between wealthy and the poor was shown through the wealthy people's dress, behavior, speech, education, and ability, which distinguished them from the lower class citizens. The second reason being the declining income of the poor. This is because the nobles were becoming accustomed to the luxurious lifestyle. Therefore, the nobles began to illegally raise rents, cheat, steal, and sometimes became violent in order to take what they wanted. The third reason being inflation and taxation, which occurred because kings who needed money to finance wars resorted to devaluing currency by cutting gold and silver coins with less precious metal, which resulted in increasing inflation and, in the end, increased tax rates. Lastly, famine and plague, which caused revolts because the plague increasingly reduced the amount of people who were workers in producing the wealth. The most notable revolt was the Peasant Revolt in Flanders, which occurred from 1323 to 1328. The Peasant Revolt in Flanders was a popular revolt in the late medieval Europe. Beginning as a series of scattered rural riots in late 1323, peasant revolts escalated into a full-scale rebellion that dominated public affairs in Flanders for nearly 5 years until 1328. The uprising in Flanders was caused by both excessive taxations that was imposed by the Count of Flanders, Louis I, and by his pro-French policies. The uprising had urban leaders in rural factories, which took over most of Flanders by 1325.
In the post-classical era, there was an increased demand of slaves for domestic and military purposes. The regions in which this demand was most apparent were Central Eurasia and Eastern Mediterranean, and parts of Africa. Wow, okay, I guess I'm glad people are asking questions, but dude, I'm giving a presentation, that's a little rude. No, you're not. I will, once you stop interrupting me. I will not calm down. This is extremely rude to interrupt a presentation like this. Frankly, I think that only a truly despicable person will ever do such a thing. Touché. Well, to answer the question, the reason for the increased demand of slaves is because of the increased demand for food. As the population was beginning to recover from the bubonic plague, farms stopped producing as large of a quantity as food as before. But once the population outweighed the amount of food being produced, they suddenly needed to produce more food. So these farmers turned to slave labor. And the reason they chose slaves was because it's free labor. Who doesn't like free labor? No, shut up, I got this. The reason military slave use increased was because wars were becoming more common in this time period, especially in the Western Mediterranean. Without the Western Roman Empire's centralized rule over the land, the Western Mediterranean split into multiple regional kingdoms. More kingdoms equals more wars. More wars equal more prisoners of wars. More prisoners of wars equal more slaves that can fight. More slaves that can fight lead to more wars that are fought by slaves. Oh my God, shut up!
Crash Course is produced and directed by Stan Muller. Our script supervisor is Danica Johnson. The show is written by my high school history teacher Raoul Meyer and myself, and our graphics team is Thought Bubble. If you want to guess at the phrase of the week, you can do so in comments. You can also suggest future phrases of the week. And if you have a question about today's video, please leave it in comments where our team of semi-professional quasi-historians will aim to answer it. Thanks for watching, and as we say in my hometown, don't forget to be awesome.